This right here is why putting pressure on companies is so important, because Nvidia just caved. But before I get to that, Andy won't want you to see this. The 5060 Ti is coming and Nvidia has a surprise. Welcome everyone to Gamer Meld. Before I get to that, a lot of you have been subscribing lately, so much so that we're finally below 70% for those of you who regularly watch yet aren't subscribed. But this still means only 35% of you are subscribed.
I pump those numbers up. Those are rookie numbers in this racket.
So if you aren't subscribed and you love PC hardware, make sure to hit that subscribe button as well as the bell icon to stay up to date on all the latest news. Okay, it's news time, and first up for today, when AMD originally announced the pricing for their RX 9070 series GPUs, a lot of people assumed that the reason the 9070 was so close in price to the 9070 XT was to push gamers into buying the more expensive option. And in my video where I addressed that very theory, I explained that it simply wasn't the case. The non-XT model is also a fantastic GPU, and some modders just proved it without a single doubt. As you can see right here, some modders actually took a 9070 XT V-BIOS, flashed it to the regular 9070, and it got a massive performance boost. In fact, let's kind of go over this one right here. So the reason why they did this was because you can see they state the base RX 9070 is quite power starved. And a lot of people were sort of commenting saying, well, why don't you just overclock it? Well, this right here is one of the big reasons the TGP and things like that are very much restricted because of the actual BIOS of the GPU. You can't just overclock past that, as well as voltages and stuff like that. But flashing a BIOS from a higher end GPU allows you to move past those restrictions. For example, as they state, the regular 9070 was limited to a 220 watt TGP compared to the 304 watt TGP of the XT GPU. And the clock speed also take a big hit, dropping from 2.97 gigahertz to 2.52 gigahertz. But someone from the PCGH community successfully flashed the Asus Prime RX 9070 with the V-BIOS of an Asus Prime RX 9070 XT. So this allowed them to clear a lot of those hindrances. And because of that, they were able to boost the power draw to 317 watts. So from 220 to 317, it's nearly a 100 watt boost. And then they got the clocks all the way up to 3.1 gigahertz. Moving down here, when it actually comes to the performance of it, it says across the 3D Mark suite, the modded 9070 coupled with the Ryzen 9 9950X3D consistently achieved 15 to 20% higher performance than similar non-modded configurations. In addition, with some overclocking and tuning, it was actually reported that they were able to beat a stock RX 9070 XT. Now, obviously, updating the V-BIOS isn't going to get past the restrictions that are on it, like the fact that it doesn't have as many cores as the 9070 XT, any kind of thing like that. But because they were able to do this and overclock it even more than the stock 9070 XT, it was ultimately able to beat it. Of course, this is a stock RX 9070 XT, so you can overclock it, but still, that is pretty impressive. With that said, I do not suggest doing this for most, just because, like they state, updating the GPU's V-BIOS will likely void any kind of warranty that you have, and you could run into some issues like potentially breaking your GPU. But still, I really just think this proves that while a lot of people kind of look past the RX 9070, it's actually a great GPU in its own right. And next up for today, if you were looking for a cheaper GPU, though we'll see how long it stays cheaper, Nvidia is apparently set to release the RTX 5060 Ti fairly soon. One of the reasons we know this is because it was recently tested in FurMark. Now, FurMark really isn't great to actually show kind of performance, what kind of performance you could expect out of a GPU. It's mostly just good for testing GPU temps and things like that, but it does tell us a couple things. For one, people are out there and they're testing it. That's great news. But also, this confirms the leaked specs of it. First, that it is a 180 watt TDP, but also it proves that it is likely coming in the middle of this month. The The rumors had suggested that, and this, of course, lends credence to that. Now, if you don't really know too much about this GPU, as you can see here, it is, according to rumors, it's set to come with a 128-bit memory bus, and it features either 16 gigabytes or 8 gigabytes of VRAM. So there is going to be two different configurations. Of course, I really am getting sick of seeing GPUs with 8 gigabytes, especially, we're talking about a 5060 Ti. I definitely think it should come with at least 12. But regardless, here we are. They do state that due to the faster 28 gigabit per second GDDR7, it is going to be getting more bandwidth, but still the amount of memory is obviously important. Either way, as you can see here, according to rumors, it's slated to launch by April 16th. And next up for today, we have a pretty interesting story. So not too long ago, I actually covered a story that had shown some board partners of Nvidia's were out there showing an RTX 5080 with 24 gigabytes of memory. That, of course, was pretty odd given the fact that the 5080 has 16 gigabytes, but the thing is that it didn't happen once, it happened multiple times. It said this company itself made the same mistake twice. And I believe there was even another company, but regardless, it was looking a little odd. Now, at the time, a lot of people were sort of thinking, okay, maybe Nvidia had originally planned for the 5080 to get 24 gigabytes of memory, and this was just a mistake. It was a little odd that it happened so many times, but now it's happened yet again, listing a 5080 Ti. You can see right here, however, MSI is not an isolated case here, as there are other AIBs apparently believing that something better than the 5080 is supposed to launch. For example, Zotac shows a 5080 Ti on their website in many places. And this is a mistake that seems quite strange, as they state, given the fact that the card launched over 2 months ago. You can see right here, it says, okay, there's a 5080, but 5080 Ti, 5080 Ti, 5080 Ti. So yeah, it's really looking like Nvidia is set to launch a 5080 Ti. And of course, I will definitely say that out of any possible Ti GPU, the 5080 model definitely makes the most sense. For one, with the fact that you have a ton of memory in between the 5080 and the 5090, then you have a ton of performance. It's a huge performance gap going from a 5080 to a 5090. So something that's sort of in between the two definitely makes sense. Though, of course, the question, as always when it comes to these GPUs, is what is the price? And not just what's the MSRP, but how much are these actually going to sell for? And lastly for today, we have a story that completely proves why putting pressure on companies is very important. If you remember, not too long ago, we learned that the RTX 50 series actually wasn't able to play 32-bit PhysX games, making it ultimately fall back on the CPU and completely destroying performance. And sure, there aren't that many PhysX games, but still, PC gaming, one of the biggest benefits of it is the fact that you can play much older games. You can go back to these classics and enjoy them just like you originally did. But of course, when it came to games with PhysX, that wasn't so much the case if you bought Nvidia's newest GPUs. Well, after much backlash, it looks like Nvidia has caved in really the only way they possibly could. As you can see right here, it says NVIDIA, PhysX, and Flow are now fully open source. Now, you might be thinking, wait, wasn't PhysX already open source? Well, sort of. As you can see right here, it says that it's actually been around 6.5 years since NVIDIA released the PhysX SDK. They went open source with it under the 3-clause BSD license. But as they state here, not all of it was actually open source. And what's wild is that the thing that was open source was kind of like the CPU side of it and not the GPU side, which is of course the important one that we would need for the RTX 50 cards. Well, this has now changed with the release of a new GitHub of the actual GPU simulation kernel source code. And the reason this is so important, and almost guaranteedly the reason why NVIDIA launched it, is because modders should be able to now make like a 32 to 64-bit compatibility layer or like a wrapper, something like that, where you can actually play it on the RTX 50 cards. And yeah, it would have been nice if Nvidia did this themselves, but let's be honest, it'll likely be done better by the open source community. Either way, this is definitely a great move by them, and like I said, almost certainly something that was brought about thanks to the backlash after people found out that, oh, 50 cards won't work on these games. So while that does it for today, are you pumped that Nvidia caved, and what do you think about an RTX 5080 Ti? Let me know down in the comments below, and if you liked the video, please subscribe and give it a thumbs up. And as always, have a great day.